The rain hammered against the cracked pavement like 1,000 tiny fists, each drop carrying with it the weight of desperation that clung to Maria's shoulders. She clutched her 6-month-old daughter closer to her chest, feeling the baby's labored breathing against her worn jacket. Little Isabella's fever had spiked to dangerous levels 3 hours ago, and Maria had already spent her last $20 on a taxi that broke down just 2 miles from their apartment. Now, standing at the edge of downtown Seattle's business district, she watched luxury cars speed past, their drivers safely cocooned behind tinted windows, oblivious to her silent prayers. Maria's hands trembled as she adjusted the thin blanket around Isabella's burning body. The emergency room was still 8 miles away, and with each passing minute, her daughter's condition seemed to worsen. The baby's usually bright eyes were now glazed and unfocused, her tiny chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths that sent ice through Maria's veins. She had tried calling an ambulance, but without insurance. The dispatcher had quoted her a fee that might as well have been $1 million. Her phone battery was at 2%, her wallet contained exactly $3.47, and the nearest bus stop was a 20-minute walk through increasingly dangerous neighborhoods. Standing there in the downpour, Maria felt the crushing weight of poverty in ways she'd never experienced before. She'd always managed to scrape by, working double shifts at the diner, collecting cans on weekends, doing whatever it took to keep food on their tiny table and a roof over their heads. But this was different. This was her baby's life hanging in the balance, and for the first time in her 23 years, Maria understood true helplessness. As another sleek sedan splashed past without slowing, Maria made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. Swallowing her pride like a bitter pill, she stepped closer to the curb and began flagging down cars, her free arm waving desperately while Isabella grew limper in her embrace. "Please," she called out to the passing vehicles, her voice barely audible above the storm. "My baby needs a hospital. Please, someone help us." The rejection came in waves of indifference. Windows remained sealed, eyes averted, engines accelerated. Maria's heart cracked a little more with each car that passed, each driver who chose to look away from her desperation. She thought about her own mother, who had died when Maria was 17, leaving her with nothing but a fierce determination to give Isabella the life she herself had never known. Now, standing in the rain with a sick baby and no options left, Maria wondered if love alone would be enough. That's when the midnight blue Lamborghini pulled up to the curb. The car's engine purred like a contented cat as the passenger window rolled down, revealing a man in his early 40s wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his eyes carried the kind of exhaustion that comes from too many 18-hour days. This was Marcus Chen, CEO of Chen Industries, though Maria had no way of knowing that the man now studying her with genuine concern had just left a board meeting where he'd approved a quarterly budget larger than most small countries' GDP. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, and Maria was surprised by the gentleness in his voice. She'd expected judgment, maybe even disgust, but instead found something that looked like genuine human compassion. "My baby," Maria managed, her voice breaking as Isabella let out a weak cry. "She's burning up with fever, and I can't get her to the hospital. I don't have money for a taxi, and the bus." She gestured helplessly at the storm. "Please, I know you don't know me, but she's all I have in this world." Marcus looked at the young woman standing in the rain, her clothes soaked through, her face streaked with tears and rainwater, and saw something that made his chest tighten. Maybe it was the way she held her baby, as if she could shield the child from the entire world's cruelty through sheer force of will. Maybe it was the quiet dignity she maintained even while begging for help. Or maybe it was something deeper, a recognition of vulnerability that struck too close to his own carefully buried memories. "Get in," he said, leaning across to open the passenger door. "Let's get your daughter to the hospital." Maria hesitated for just a moment, years of caution warring with desperate need, before sliding into the leather seat that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. The car's interior was warm and dry, filled with the subtle scent of expensive cologne and new leather. Isabella stirred weakly in her arms, and Maria felt a flicker of hope for the first time in hours. As Marcus pulled away from the curb, Maria tried to process what was happening. "I should tell you," she said quietly. "I can't pay you back, not right away. I work at Murphy's Diner on 5th Street, and I can give you what I can from my tips, but don't worry about that," Marcus said, his eyes focused on the road ahead. He was driving with careful precision, fast enough to matter but careful enough to keep them safe. "What's your daughter's name?" "Isabella," Maria whispered, stroking the baby's damp hair. "She just turned 6 months old last week." "She's never been sick like this before." Marcus nodded, and something in his expression grew distant. "My daughter Emma would have been about that age," he said quietly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as they did Maria. "She died of meningitis when she was 7 months old." "That was 12 years ago." The car fell silent except for the hum of the engine and Isabella's labored breathing. Maria stared at Marcus, seeing him differently now, understanding the pain that flickered behind his composed exterior. "I'm so sorry," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "My wife and I, we were both working all the time back then, building the company, chasing success. We had a nanny, the best pediatrician money could buy, every advantage you could imagine." Marcus's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, but none of that mattered in the end. "When Emma got sick, when she really needed us, we weren't paying attention. We missed the signs, trusted that someone else would notice what we were too busy to see." Maria felt tears sliding down her cheeks, not just for her own fear but for the stranger's long-buried grief. "You couldn't have known," she said softly. "Maybe not," Marcus replied. "But I've spent 12 years wondering what would have happened if I'd been the kind of father who noticed when something was wrong, who put her first instead of putting work first." He glanced at Maria, then at Isabella. "You noticed. You're here, fighting for her, doing everything you can. That's what matters." They pulled up to Seattle General's emergency entrance, and Marcus was out of the car before Maria could even unbuckle her seatbelt. He opened her door, helping her out with Isabella, and then did something that would stay with Maria for the rest of her life. He walked with them to the reception desk, and when the triage nurse began asking about insurance and payment methods, Marcus quietly slid his Platinum American Express card across the counter. "Whatever this baby needs," he said simply. "Whatever it costs." The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures, tests, and worried waiting. Isabella was diagnosed with a severe respiratory infection that, left untreated, could have developed into pneumonia. The emergency room staff worked with quiet efficiency, administering antibiotics and monitoring her condition until her fever broke and her breathing eased. Throughout it all, Marcus stayed in the waiting room, making phone calls to reschedule meetings and responding to increasingly frantic messages from his assistant. When the doctor finally emerged with good news, Maria broke down completely. Isabella was going to be fine, the infection had been caught in time, the treatment was working, and her daughter would make a full recovery. As Maria sobbed with relief, she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder and looked up to find Marcus watching her with something that might have been peace in his eyes. "Thank you," Maria said, the words feeling inadequate for everything he'd done. "I don't know how to repay you for this. You saved her life." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Actually, I think she might have saved mine." He looked through the window of the pediatric ward, where Isabella was sleeping peacefully in her hospital bed, her color returned, her breathing steady and strong. "I've been carrying Emma's death around like a stone in my chest for 12 years, blaming myself, wondering if I could have done something different. But watching you tonight, seeing how you fought for your daughter, how you never gave up." He trailed off, then looked directly at Maria. "You reminded me what real love looks like, what being a parent really means." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back. "This is my direct number," he said, handing it to Maria. "I want you to call me when Isabella is discharged. I'd like to help you both get back on your feet, if you'll let me." Maria stared at the card, recognizing the company name even though she'd never imagined she'd meet someone like Marcus Chen. "I can't accept charity," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "It's not charity," Marcus replied. "It's an investment. In Isabella's future, yes, but also in mine. I've spent 12 years making money and forgetting what it's for. You've reminded me that it's supposed to be about taking care of people, about making sure that babies like Isabella and Emma get the chance to grow up healthy and loved. He paused, then added quietly, "I'm sorry it took me so long to remember that." 3 months later, Maria was working as the office manager for Chen Industries' new community outreach program, a position that paid well enough for her to afford a decent apartment and health insurance for both her and Isabella. Marcus had also established the Emma Chen Foundation, dedicated to providing emergency medical care for children whose families couldn't afford it. Maria served on the board, helping to identify families in need and ensuring that no parent ever had to stand in the rain, helpless, while their child suffered. Isabella, now 9 months old and thriving, had become something of an unofficial mascot around the Chen Industries building. She would babble happily in her carrier while Maria worked, charming executives and maintenance staff alike with her bright smile and infectious giggle. Sometimes Marcus would stop by Maria's office just to see Isabella, and Maria noticed how his face would light up when the baby reached for him with chubby hands. On the first anniversary of that rainy night, Marcus and Maria stood together in the pediatric ward of Seattle General, which now bore a small plaque reading Emma Chen Wing next to the entrance. They were there for the foundation's monthly visit, bringing toys and books to children who were facing their own medical battles. Isabella, now walking and getting into everything, toddled between the hospital beds, distributing hugs and smiles with the generous spirit that seemed to be her natural inheritance. "Do you ever think about that night?" Maria asked as they watched Isabella charm a young boy recovering from surgery. Marcus nodded. "Every day," he said. "It changed everything for me, not just because of the foundation or the work we're doing now, but because it reminded me who I wanted to be, who I should have been all along." He turned to Maria, his expression serious. "You and Isabella, you gave me a second chance to be the kind of person my daughter would have been proud of." Maria smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought them both to this moment. "I used to think that night was the worst thing that ever happened to us," she said. "Isabella was so sick, and I was so scared and alone. But now I realize it was actually the best thing, not the sickness, but finding you, finding someone who understood that love means showing up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." As they prepared to leave the hospital, Isabella asleep in her stroller after a busy afternoon of spreading joy, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed. The company was more profitable than ever, but now it had a soul that went beyond quarterly earnings. The Chen Industries employee healthcare plan was among the best in the country, and the foundation had helped hundreds of families avoid the desperate situation Maria had faced that rainy night. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus had learned to live with purpose again. Emma's death would always be a part of him, a scar that had shaped who he became. But it was no longer a wound that consumed him. Instead, it had become a source of strength, a reminder of what truly mattered in life. Every child the foundation helped, every family they supported, was a way of honoring Emma's memory while creating the kind of world she would have wanted to grow up in. Walking to his car that evening, Marcus realized he was no longer the man who had driven past countless people in need, insulated by wealth and success from the real struggles of the world. Maria and Isabella had cracked open his carefully constructed walls and shown him that true wealth wasn't measured in stock options or quarterly profits, but in the connections we make and the lives we touch. The midnight blue Lamborghini still sat in his garage, but these days Marcus was more likely to be found driving the foundation's modest sedan, visiting families and checking on the children they'd helped. He'd learned that the real luxury in life wasn't leather seats or perfect climate control, but the warmth that came from knowing you'd made a difference in someone's darkest moment. That night, as Maria tucked Isabella into her crib in their comfortable apartment, she whispered the same prayer she'd said every night for the past year: gratitude for the stranger who had stopped in the rain and changed their lives forever. And 8 miles across the city, Marcus Chen sat in his study, looking at a framed photo of Emma alongside a newer picture of Isabella taking her first steps, finally understanding that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in our most desperate moments, delivered by the people brave enough to ask for help and generous enough to give it.